What is up, Internet basketball junkies? Welcome to another session of our advanced coaching course. I'm fired up for this one because tonight we're talking about a stretch of the season that quietly determines everything that comes after it. Even though most coaches feel like they're just trying to survive the preseason period. So I'm joined by Coach Kramer. In this session, we're going to break down two of my guides in one conversation. The two guides are your best preseason ever and your best tryouts ever. We're going to talk about the fall period before the season actually starts, the in between space where coaches are kind of juggling paperwork, expectations, staff meetings, open gyms, conditioning, and about 1,000 unanswered questions. So, this is the part of the year where you're trying to take care of yourself, you're trying to take care of your staff, you're trying to set your standards for your team, and you're trying to plan without burning everyone out before day one of practice. So we'll shift into your best tryouts ever after we talk about the preseason period, which is about removing chaos from one of the most stressful weeks on the basketball calendar. So we'll talk about how to structure tryouts so that you as a coach get to see what you need to see. We'll talk about what drills reveal the best of the basketball abilities your players have. We'll talk about how to organize and observe and evaluate your players efficiently and how to execute tryouts with clarity and fairness and confidence. So if you've ever felt overwhelmed heading into your preseason period or unsure of your tryouts, I think you're in the right place for this one. Hey, Coach Kramer, thanks for joining me on this adventure today.
Yeah, thanks for having me again, Coach Hack, and Happy New Year to you, and all that other good stuff. And hope your Christmas was great. I think this is a really, really good topic because I think that a lot of times this is something, especially young coaches, don't I don't want to say don't think about a lot, but like it can definitely be easily, like you said, kind of get into a situation where you're just trying to survive, and you really don't want it to be that. You want it to be productive, and I think it's important that to go into this into the season in the right frame of mind, that preseason time, on the floor and off the floor are really crucial. So I'm interested to see, as always, where our discussion goes, because I know, every coach is going to be a little bit different with this stuff. So it'll be interesting to hear your point of view on these ideas.
Yeah, I designed this preseason guide and the tryout guide based on personal experience where I'd had times early in my coaching career where I felt like I was ran ragged before the season even started. So I started to implement some of these strategies, and those are the strategies that we're going to talk about here in this video. But have you ever felt like your season was kind of decided before your first official practice based on things that had happened in the preseason or tryouts, Coach?
Man, that's a great question. I've mentioned this in a couple other videos, but I coached for a really, really excellent head coach, and he was extremely organized from season to season. So I had a great role model to watch when I coached with Henry Cobb at Canton South. My first 7 years, being a teacher and a coach at the high school level, and so I felt like he prepared me well for the things that I needed to do. So I went into it with an idea of how I wanted to approach it. And I'm super grateful to him for that, because I don't think without those years, with him and kind of seeing the way he did it, that I would have been prepared at all for it. That being said, I'm not Henry Cobb, and some of the things that he did, weren't necessarily things that I wanted to do too. So yeah, just like you said, a lot of it's experience, and you kind of just pick and choose, and you keep the things that work for you, and you get rid of the things that don't. I think you've already mentioned one of the things that I think is really critical when you're working with high school athletes, and coaches, to really be productive without burning them out before the season starts. That burning them out piece, I think, can be a tricky one, because we have to remember this is our life, right? We're living that coaching life, as I like to say, and basketball is something that that not every kid, it's not their life, not all of them. So you have to be really careful to be productive without, like you said, running it into the ground before the season starts. So I think that's a key balance to keep.
I've definitely had some shockers during this preseason and tryout period. And the first one that comes to mind was My star player was also the star quarterback on the football team.
Yeah.
So they were playing in week 10, their rivals. This is St. Thomas against Central Catholic.
Yeah.
And I'm arriving to the rivalry game a little bit late with my coaching staff. And as soon as we pull up to the stadium, our star basketball player is down on the field with a crowd around him getting medical attention. So he ended up having a torn labrum. We thought our basketball season was basically over. But this kid decided to put off his surgery that he needed for his shoulder, play the whole basketball season with some huge contraption on his shoulder. And he played through the season effectively enough to be Stark County Player of the Year from St. Thomas Aquinas, which is hard to do in Stark County because there's so many big schools in our area. So this is Anthony Meglin, and he ended up playing college football at John Carroll. And he put his football career on hold to play one more season of high school basketball. So he played his basketball season, got his surgery, had to redshirt his first year of college football, and then went on to have a fantastic college football career. That included beating Mount Union for the first time in some historically long period of time. The other thing that comes to mind is I had three of the best athletes in the school surprise me and come out for the team after not participating at all in the summer. They were playing football in the fall, and they just kind of popped in and said, "Oh, we're ready to play basketball now, coach," which this led to some controversy because I had envisioned my team basically without these guys, and I wanted to see what that team had. So I ended up cutting these kids. It caused some issues in the community, but ultimately they had not expressed any interest in playing basketball until we were already doing our tryouts, which put me in a tough position. So I made a tough call there. Some people didn't like it. These were good athletes, but they weren't necessarily basketball players. We'll never know if they could have actually helped us or not, but that's always a surprise. Coaching at a big school like I was at, to just have three kids come in and try to assert themselves onto your roster with no forewarning. That was kind of a shocker for me there. But tryouts are really a stressful period for coaches. Why do you think it's so stressful, Coach?
I mean, for the reason you just said, I think that's a perfect example. I had that happen a couple times. What I found is that the kids that came out that hadn't experienced basketball before, a lot of times I think, especially with a senior, they think, all right, well, my football career is over now. And I still like to play sports. So I think I'll just go out for basketball, right, and have some fun with it. And, that never works. Basketball's fun, but it's fun because you're competitive when you choose to play an interscholastic sport at the high school level. And when a kid comes out, I've found that tries to do that, and they're looking to kind of just add a hobby or something to their, to their resume or their college application, it typically doesn't work out well. Usually when that's happened for me, it's been stressful, but the athlete has kind of seen the handwriting on the wall after 2 or 3 days. And I actually had one. He was a great kid. He came out. I got along with him really well in the classroom, and I was a fan of his on the football field. And he was friends with a number of my basketball players. And the basketball players were giving me, well, he might be able to help us. He's a really good athlete. He might be able to guard. He came to practice for 3 days and hit me up after the third practice and said, "Hey, coach, man, I thought I could do this, man. You guys are way more serious than I thought. This is really hard." He goes, "I'm going to get back up in the stands with the Dirty Birds, and I'm going to be your number one fan, but I can't do this." And I really appreciated that kid and respected him for saying that. And it kind of goes to the way that I always ran tryouts for upperclassmen. I didn't do it in an open gym setting like I know some guys do when they play 5-on-5 and stand there and pretend like they're taking notes. I mean, I put those kids in a practice because I think one of the things when you get into tryouts, and we'll talk about this later, probably more, I think basketball IQ and an ability to take to coaching is perhaps the greatest skill that becomes an obstacle for a kid like that. And that's really what he was telling me. It wasn't the physical part of it. I mean, he could run up and down the floor, although we ran a lot, and that was a little bit of a shock for him. It was more just about you need to be here. You got to take that charge. We rotate, we talk. It's just really overwhelming. It's like being thrown into a calculus class before you took pre-algebra. It's tough. So I definitely have had those experiences as well.
Last thing before we dive into the materials here, what do you think the biggest mistake coaches make during their tryouts? And I'll go first here. I think there's a temptation to run tryouts too much like a practice. I think you have to have some elements of your practice in a tryout. But when you really are trying to teach too many things in a tryout, it ends up with too much of the coach talking and not enough of the players playing and being evaluated. What do you think the biggest mistake coaches make during tryouts is?
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. I think balance is key. I don't think it can be, if you're truly trying kids out, I don't think it can be just like a practice. But I also think one of the biggest mistakes, and I've seen a couple coaches do this, where you just put them in 5-on-5 teams and they play pickup basketball for 2 or 3 days.
Yeah.
I think that's a horrible mistake too, because what it turns into is exactly what you would expect it to. Kids that aren't sure if they're going to make the team, they want to show you that they can make the team by shooting the ball every time they touch it, or doing something, making a great play, or they're just things that really don't have anything to do with being a high school basketball player.
Yeah.
And so, like I said, I think that's a great point. I think balance is really important. You'll like this. When I was at Milton in Georgia, it was a little bit different situation because we were such a big school, and I did have 2 or 3 high major prospects on my roster at any time with 2 or 3 other mid majors, and then there's some other really good high school players that were clearly going to be rotational kids. So what I would do at Milton is we started practicing that first day with what we knew was going to be our varsity team, so our top 10 to 12 players, and then I had what we called walk-on tryouts after the practice.
Yeah.
And it's exactly what it sounded like. Kids that hadn't tried out before, we're going to give them their chance to do that. My JV coach kind of ran that. I oversaw that, and there were some players that we found that rounded out our JV roster. There was one varsity player that we picked up on those. He was a football player named Cortez Sapp that played 4 years of football at University of Tennessee. After he graduated, Cortez kind of showed out on the basketball floor because he was 6'4". He was built like an SEC linebacker, and he had a 40-inch vertical leap. So it didn't take a lot of genius to spot him at our walk-on tryout. But like so many of those kids showed up to that, and they just really weren't basketball players. And at a school like Milton, where we had so much talent and we really needed to get started because we were going to hit the road on the national schedule right away, we had to get into our practices, and that's kind of the way we did it down there.
Okay, so I want to dive into the materials here, and the way that we're going to structure talking about the preseason period is in kind of 4 categories, and we'll spend just a little bit of time on each. But the first one is taking care of yourself as a coach. The second one is taking care of your staff. The third one is taking care of your team. And the fourth one is the planning, the essentials of planning during this period. So the first part of this is self-care. And what I think is the most important piece here is the idea of diet and exercise, because I'm good to add at least about 10 pounds through each season. Just the stress of the season, the odd hours, the lack of sleeping, the convenience of the drive-through, going out with your staff and having drinks and dinner and things like that. So I know some coaches that go the other way and they lose weight, but I'm good for about 10 pounds. So I wanted to try to head that off in the preseason period, where I made sure I was building good habits with diet and exercise, where I was doing some meal prepping for the week, because I know my time's going to be limited in season. I know I'm going to be tempted to just stop on a drive-through instead of getting something healthy that I made in my own kitchen. And I think the exercise is there, when you're in season, there's not very much time to exercise. You're going from one thing to another, and to build in habits where you have a little bit more time available in the preseason. So you're building in those habits of getting your exercise in. That can carry over into the season if it's become a habit for you through the preseason or even before that. How much do you think this affects your mental, coach? Just you getting yourself in good shape and fueling your body right in this preseason period to head into a season.
I mean, it's incredibly important, Matt. I think I told you this in another video that we did about just generally taking care of yourself. And I was an assistant coach, and I had a chance to meet Coach Calipari. he just gotten off the treadmill before he was going into practice, and when he was sweating, when I asked him, "What's up, coach? You getting one in?" And he said, "Listen, coach, my players hate me if I don't get exercise before I get on the floor." And I'd already been exercising before too, and I hearing it from a really high level guy, it really struck me how much just being physically healthy helps your mental mindset when you step on the floor. And so I wasn't probably great at that when I first started as a head coach. I was one of those guys that felt like if I wasn't doing something every waking second of the day, connected to basketball, like from watching film to making a practice schedule to scheming X's and O's to, looking at our X's and O's to self-scouting to, whatever. I felt like maybe I wasn't doing my job, but the older I got, the more I realized that a lot of that time was wasted, and working smarter rather than working longer, harder hours. And like you said, taking care of myself, it just made me a better coach. It just did. And I think it's natural for any young coach to get, caught up in that kind of thing that way. But like, listen, by the time I was, 5-6 years into my head coaching career, I insisted on seventh period or last period, whatever it is at your school, planning, not to plan my practices or to grade papers, because I needed the treadmill before I walked on the gym floor. It was just a must. I needed that time, to decompress. We teach most coaches, I say a lot of coaches are teaching a full schedule. I always did, even when I was at Milton, coaching on that national schedule. And it is really, really hard. For 1 year at Milton, I didn't have that. I had a last period class, and then I had a straight walk to the gym and right on the practice floor. And I never had a harder time, with my mental, I don't want to say mental health, but like my general good spirit and attitude when I walked on the floor than I did with that, because 3 minutes, on a walk to the gym after teaching 6 classes is not enough to hit that reset button. It's just not. So I think, to me, that's the most important piece. And all the things you said is making sure that I get some time to get some exercise in, and, to step on the floor, with all of the days, whatever, washed away, and an ability to really focus mentally on the things I need to do to serve my players.
Yeah, so we talked about diet and exercise and the importance of getting your body in a good place where you're not feeling like a slob entering the season, and then have the prospects of it even getting worse with the lack of time and energy that you have trying to coach in season. I think the second part of this is your social life, which can get pushed to the curb during basketball season. You don't really have time to connect with your friends. You can't really go out to dinner with your wife's friends or things like that. So I think you want to make a concerted effort during this fall period to kind of stash some coin in the bank with your friends, where you're being assertive, you're planning things, you're connecting with your friends, and then you'll get a little bit more grace in how you operate during the season. I think they'd be a little bit more understanding if you forget to respond to their text, if you'd planted some seeds in that preseason period. And I think the last element of this is to get away on a vacation of some sort. Try to get basketball out of your mind, even if it's just a couple days, even if you want to count a coaching clinic as something like this, but just a way to get away from it, because you're entering into a 5-month grind of a season. From November to March, you're pretty much spoken for between practices and practice planning and scouting and team events and all of that stuff. So I like to kind of at least get to a coaching clinic, if not do something social where I'm getting out of the area and I'm focusing on something other than basketball as a priority for probably once in my life, and just trying to disconnect a little bit to get in the right headspace for the season that's approaching. Does any of that resonate with you, either taking a trip or making extra efforts with your social group?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. The older I got, the more likely it was that my coaches were my best friends. So, and again, through the networking that we do, once you've had a chance to build a staff and you get the people around you that you really want and like, I found that we were doing a lot of things together. And, and sometimes, Matt, with a wife or girlfriend or whatever, going out and scouting a game back in the day, before there was all the video, you can turn that into a nice meal out someplace afterwards, or some drinks and things like that. I mean, I think that kind of stuff is good. What we did when I was at Fairless a couple times with my assistant Tim Vick, the one year we took our seniors to an Ohio State football game, and an overnight thing. We actually did that 2 years. That was a really good thing. When I was in Georgia and I had the high level prospects, I could reach out to any of those coaches that were recruiting my guys, and we could go on a really cool campus trip, and sit with a coaching staff and talk basketball and do some social things with those. We went down to Florida when Billy Donovan was there and did that. It was kind of an interesting thing because Bill Raftery and his former sidekick on there, the one that's not with him anymore, the older guy that retired a few years back, Vern Lundquist, were there on campus doing a piece on him at the time. So we got to go out and as a staff and have some dinner and some drinks with those guys, and just mixing it up, and then sometimes making it be something totally different from basketball. Take the wife to a concert. We like to go see live music. Let's go see Billy Joel. You know what I mean? Or right after the basketball season ended, the one year, I surprised her. I bought Billy Joel tickets. He was playing Madison Square Garden. We went to New York City in April, like as soon as the basketball season was over. So making sure that you're nurturing those relationships is important. Especially if you're a married coach. Trust me, I wasn't always the best at that, and there's some things that I probably would have done differently if I could go back and done them. You can't expect that everybody is going to always understand exactly what you're going through. So sometimes you kind of got to step outside of yourself and remember to include those people that are important to you. Especially like you said, to build some coinage, or to get some stock in the bank there before the season starts, and really let the people that are important to you know how important they are before that season starts.
Yeah, so let's move on to how we're going to work with our staff during this preseason. And I think it starts with a preseason staff meeting where you're outlining the expectations of your coaches. If you haven't already done that to this point, you might X and O a little bit, where you're laying out your vision for what the X and O's look like and getting feedback from your coaches, allowing them to have whatever input you'd want to have there. I think delegating parts of your system to your coaching staff is a wise move to do this time of year, where an assistant coach, let's say, I'm going to have an assistant coach be in charge of our baseline out of bounds package. This way he has a little bit of time to think about what he wants to do, and I'm not putting him on the spot on practice day one, but we have a little bit of time to figure out what that might look like ahead of time. And then again, talking about a staff field trip, going to a clinic with your staff, building on this meeting where you're developing some rapport. And I'm like you, where a lot of the coaches on my coaching staff ended up being close friends of mine. But if you're on a staff that's a little bit more distant, making a specific effort to go out and do something together to build some camaraderie before you enter into that season is a wise thing to do. So I'm going to hand it off to you, and I'm looking to hear from you, your approach with your staff in the preseason, and kind of what you'd be looking to accomplish as you delegate roles and lay out expectations.
Yeah, I mean, it depends on where we are in program development, right? So like my first year at a school, it would be the whole staff over at the house typically, and there would be some X's and O's, maybe just some base things that we're going to teach, and some terminology and things like that we want to use, and my general expectations and the way that I run a practice, and kind of just trying to give them a vision of what it's going to look like once we get started. The longer I'm at a program, the longer I'm with a staff, the less that'd be about X's and O's, and more about the delegating, and things like that you were talking about. One of the things that I really believed in, and I did it in the spring and I did it again in the fall to make sure that I had the guys in the right place, is I would always go out to dinner with them, or to go out and grab some wings, or even go golfing. I had some guys that really like to golf, and I like to knock it around a little bit. It's a great way to go out and just kind of take their temperature and make sure they feel like they're in the best position, for them personally, as far as, where they stand on the staff. So like, are they the JV coach? Are they the varsity assistant? Would they be better? Would they better be served to be a freshman coach or at the middle school level? Guys' lives change, I've found. And I had some coaches that were doing a pretty good job for me at the high school level that had some things change in their lives. One guy got married and took the head baseball job, right? He was my varsity assistant. He didn't feel like he could give the varsity assistant the time it needed anymore because of the new relationship, obviously, and the fact that he was also now the head baseball coach. So we made some adjustments, and I talked to some other guys, and sometimes one guy thinks that he needs to take a step back, and another guy feels like he's ready to take a step forward. You have those conversations separately, and it makes it a lot easier to make those decisions. Because you're really putting the ball in the court of those assistants. And one of the things that I've found is I want assistants that feel valued. I want assistants that feel heard. I want to be able to serve my assistants the same as they're serving me, but in a different way. So like if they aspire to be a head coach, I want to make sure they're getting the opportunity to do that and grow towards that. But I also don't want to put any of them in a situation where they feel like they've overextended themselves, can't commit to the things that I need them. So just informal, real, straightforward. Hey, tell me what it is type conversations make it easier to get those guys in the right spots. And I never moved a guy, never had to move a guy, other than one time where I had to make a tough decision and get rid of a coach that just kind of wanted to do his own thing. And that was pretty early in my career. And it was a hard thing for me to do because it just is, right? Other than that, I never really had to have a tough conversation with a coach. Because we had those conversations, and I always felt it was in my best interest, the best interest of the players, the program, and the coach, to put them in a position where they feel like they were able to best serve the program.
So before we move on, what we're looking at here is a sheet that I would pass out to my assistant coaches, and it would give general job descriptions for the coaching staff. So we all are under these general coach expectations, where we're outlining what's important to us, what our values are, how we want to confront behavior and discipline, the need to be on time, just the basic things. And then it's going to progress into a specific job description for each coach, where it's going to say, this is Coach Albert in practice. I want him emphasizing these things. I want him enforcing these things. I want him to be attentive to these drills. I want him to take attendance. I want him to deal with injuries when they happen. And then it goes on from there. In the game, I want feedback on adjustments and scheme. I want timeout huddles to be monitored for our players, that they're acting the right way. I want him to prep jerseys and do all these different things. And then it extends into an off-court responsibility. So moving on from there, we're going to talk about how we manage our teams, our players specifically during this preseason. And I think there's one thing that's very interesting about this preseason period. Everybody that's interested in basketball that's not playing a fall sport is going to be in the gym because they want to make a good impression on you to make the team. So you have everybody there, and you have them trying hard if they're not in another sport. So I always like to do conditioning to see who is really serious about being on the team. Like, I didn't want our fall workouts to just be fun where anybody could just roll in and, participate. I wanted to kind of build a little bit of a moat around the program and say, hey, this is going to be tough if you want to do this. This isn't just open gym. We're going to run and we're going to lift and we're going to do things like that. Did you have that kind of mindset with the programs that you ran where you were trying to figure out who was serious about basketball or not in this preseason period?
I mean, 100%, Matt. If you're not doing it that way, I think you're making a mistake, and you're opening the door to making tryouts a lot harder. If that's not what you're doing, there's nothing. The two ugliest words in basketball to me are open gym, because if it's truly just roll the ball out and let kids play pickup, that is, I'd stop short of saying it's a total waste of time. If an established program, and every player that walks on the floor knows the expectation, and they're going to get after each other. Man, until that happens, you roll them out, let them play 5-on-5 for an hour and a half, and you're going to wish you had that hour and a half back at the end of your life sometime, because it's just not, it's not constructive. There has to be some conditioning involved in that. There has to be something hard about it. I say this all the time. I mean, basketball's hard. It's hard to win a basketball game. It's hard to be a good basketball player. The reason you know that is because not everybody can be good, and not every team can be good. And the good ones do the hard things consistently. And I think that that's got to be established in an open gym. Again, we don't practice, right? It's not that, but you got to lift the weights. You've got to do some cardio conditioning. There's got to be some things that, when the kids walk out of there, they say, wow, we worked at it tonight. Because if that didn't happen, you're going to end up with a gym full of people, and you're not going to be sure who really wants to play. You got to find out. And that's one of the ways you do it.
Yeah, and the other thing that I got accustomed to doing was kind of stacking our activities on top of each other. Because what I found is if we did open gym one day and then lifting and conditioning the next day, we would have a lot of people there for open gym, but not as many for the lifting and conditioning. Yeah. So I wanted to make sure when we got together as a team, we were doing, basketball activities and conditioning and weight room stuff all on the same day instead of splitting them into different days. The conditioning that I always like to use was this ladder. And this is what I had to run when I was a college basketball player from my college coach. Sure. And it's a nice kind of conditioning test where basically the players have to run time sprints. You'd run them in 3 groups, and you have timed amount of sprints. Down is 1, back is 2. Yep. So they always end on odd numbers. So you're always ending on the same side of the court, walking back on the outside of the court while the other 2 groups run. And then you have your time to rest while the other groups run. So you run it in 3 groups. So you're in this continuous cycle of running, and then you have double the amount of time that you ran to rest. But it goes up to 11 and then back down to 1. And what we would always do is if you completed the whole ladder in time, you were done and you didn't have to run it anymore. But we would run it basically every time we met on the court, and each individual had to run it until they finished each sprint on time in consecutive order. So once they finished it, that time was theirs. They could sit and watch. They could shoot free throws on the side. But if you never finish the ladder, you do it the entire time we are in preseason. So I stole that from my college coach. It doesn't seem like much just looking at it on paper here, but I can tell you it's kind of a grind to get through. And I've seen many players tap out on this kind of sprint conditioning. Sure. Yeah. There's been some throw up, maybe even by me at times. And even once in my college career, we had one player who was running his sprints, and he ran right out the door, and he went back to his room and packed his things, and he was gone the next day from the ladder. So this can be serious business of getting in shape. And I can tell you that anybody that's does the ladder and finishes them all in time, they are in certified shape to be able to start practice.
That's a great story, man. I don't have any stories like that at all. That's you got to name the drill after that somehow. You should have called that the dropout drill. That's good stuff, man. We had one that we always did in preseason, and I called it the Cincinnati drill because I got it from Coach Huggins when he was at UC. And there was no ball on the floor or anything, but because the college game, because they play in 4-minute increments to the TV timeout, their conditioning and strength coaches would condition them in those 4-minute intervals, right? And so what would happen is the guy'd have a whistle and the team would be on the floor, and he'd just yell out instructions. He'd yell sprint, and they'd sprint for like 8 seconds. Then he'd yell that jump stop, and they'd jump stop and they'd hold their stance. And then he'd yell slide, and they'd slide for 5 seconds. And this went on for a 4-minute period. And at the 4-minute period, he hit the whistle, and they practiced a timeout. So we did that, starting after when I saw that, when I was a head coach at Fairless. And one of my mantras was kind of always always end every timeout with win the next 2 minutes. Because I found that the way we played in spurts, we always like to think we were 1 2-minute spurt away from, getting back in a game or blowing a team out or, taking a 10-point lead, whatever the case might be. So we did that same drill, but we did it in 2-minute intervals, and we practiced, our timeouts. Same thing. We'd have chairs out there, and the 5 players that were starters would sit, and the other kids would circle around them, and we would literally work on, here's the way that we want you to behave during a timeout in season. And it was good for everybody in the gym to see that, even the younger kids, to understand that there was, not just the conditioning going on, but also a way that we do things in games. in that way is the way that we expect everybody to do it. So there was there's some culture building going on there.
So you're lifting weights in this preseason period to get stronger. Obviously, once your season starts, you still want to be lifting, but you can't do as much as you can when you're not building it out around a game schedule. But I thought one of the most interesting things to do during this preseason period was some testing and screening of our athletes, where you're testing them for imbalances. We would bring in our trainer of the school, and he would do different tests with the kids. And we were able to identify some different imbalances that some kids had that they could work on before they really tried to add strength. And the biggest thing with that was injury prevention, where we felt like we weren't piling on strength building on top of a frame that wasn't strong. So I got into that a little bit later in my Glen Oak tenure. But on the court activities, I think what I like to do was a lot of things that were had a conditioning element to them. So a lot of full court one-on-one and stuff like that. It's really dependent on what your state allows you to do. I know a lot of states allow different things at different periods of the time. So you really got to pay attention to what your state allows you to do. But then you've got this issue of, we might only have one gym because volleyball is practicing in the other one, or the girls basketball team or whatever. How do you manage a lot of kids? I'd get into situations where I'd have 50 or 60 kids at an open gym in the fall. And, how do you get activity for all these kids? So I think the most interesting thing that I come up with was these different frameworks for how to play basketball. And we would use this ping pong method, which is 5-on-5-on-5. So basically you would play a half court possession against another team. Whoever won that possession would take the ball and go play another team that's waiting. And that's a great way to play half court basketball. And if you think about it, if you go cross court and you're running 2 of these games of 5-on-5-on-5 ping pong, you can have 30 players involved playing all at once, as opposed to just the standard 20 if you were using a main court. And, the other thing that you can do there is you can have subs on each team. So what's 5-on-5-on-5, each team might have a sub or 2, and you're able to run that for, 20 or 30 minutes, and a lot of kids getting a lot of action all at once. And the other structure that I'm a proponent of is this racer concept. And this is something that I stole from PGC basketball. But basically, there's 4 teams of 5 players. There's 2 teams that are waiting on each baseline and 2 teams playing. And basically, the 2 teams on the court play until a basket is scored. And whichever basket is scored, the team that's waiting on the baseline grabs the ball and they race it back at the team that just scored. So in theory, it's not a perfect balance of who gets to play equal amount. You play a possession until somebody scores, and then whoever's waiting on the baseline. But it's great for conditioning, because as soon as the basket's scored, the other team is bringing it, and they've been waiting on the sideline, so they have lots of energy. So I kind of like these 2 different strategies. Ping pong is really a half-court focus, where you can work on your set plays and your actions and things like that. And racer is more of a transition element. So we would have racer cooking on 2 courts going cross court, and we could have as many as 40 plus kids being involved in the action at once. And that way you don't have like whole teams of 5 just sitting on the sidelines doing nothing for 15 minutes. They might have to wait a minute or 30 seconds or 45 seconds to get back on the court, but they're all active and engaged in what's happening on the basketball court. Any strategies for the weight room or on court during this preseason period?
Yeah, I mean, I like those 2 things. I've never used them. We used the ping pong. We always called it cutthroat in practice. It'd be 5-on-5-on-5 when we're working on an offensive action or a set play or whatever the case may be. So we did a lot of that in season. I like that racer concept. That's really good for. I feel like a team that wants to play up tempo. Definitely would consider using those. The big thing with the open gym stuff is I never had 40 or 50 kids in the gym. Maybe you're just nicer than me, Coach Hack, because I started to think that maybe I was just not that nice of a guy. I don't know. It's weird. I feel like, and I don't know what the dynamic was at Glen Oak, but even at Milton, the basketball players kind of knew who the basketball players were, and you just didn't get a lot of people coming out that thought that they could do it. You know what I mean? I'm not really sure why, but like the big thing for me at open gym, let's say we have 20 in the gym, right? The games have to be short. They have to be very short games. We played games to 5. Essentially what we did. Sometimes we played them straight up. Sometimes we play them where we play Carolina fast break style, where the team that scores keeps the ball and goes the other way. That's a great conditioning drill, and it's a great way to play open gym. It's going to get both teams in shape, and the bottom line is if you don't guard anybody, you don't ever touch the ball, and you're back on the sideline. So we like to mix it up with the way that we did it. A lot of short games so that nobody was standing around for too terribly long. And I always felt like that kept everybody involved, and it kept the energy level up. One of my big, I don't want to call it a pet peeve, but I guess it is, was you have to know the score. Nothing drove me crazier than we did. I threw a team out of the open gym one time when they didn't know the score. I'd been at the school when I was at Canton South, and we kind of gone through a rebuild. It was our first open gym. And I stopped the action after about 5 minutes, and I said, "What's the score?" And nobody knew, And I'm like, "How do you not know the score? Right? How do you play basketball without knowing the score?" So I told them to come back tomorrow, and they thought that it was excessive. But my point was, we want to be competitive, right? So like when push comes to shove, you want action, you want conditioning, you want it to be hard. You also want them to get to play some basketball, but they have to be competitive. I mean, you're either breeding competitive spirit or you're not, right? There's like no in between to that. So I think that's a really important thing too.
Yeah, if you want to know how nice I am as a coach, I got myself actually in some hot water in this preseason period one time where we were hosting workouts at one of our middle school gyms, and one of our big things was being on time. So I would literally lock out the doors at the time the workout was supposed to start and turn kids away.
Yeah.
And enough kids complained, and I had to meet with my AD about locking kids out of the gym that weren't there on time. Some people might consider that not nice. Others might consider that just teaching time management skills. But moving on, in this kind of preseason period here, Coach, there's a planning element that becomes real important. So you're doing your equipment ordering. You're kind of examining your roster or your potential roster. You're creating an identity in your head of how you want to play. You are creating your team goals for the season. You're planning what your tryouts might look like. You're probably trimming your playbook. If you're like you and I, you probably have too many things that you want to do on offense. It'd be a good activity to trim that down a bit. You're making an implementation schedule. I would like your thoughts on, you have the scheme that you want to run. How do you implement that out over your preseason period so that you have all the things installed by the time your first game goes?
Yeah. I mean, I'm big on, I always had I'm an old head, so I'm not doing this with a computer, right? I had a whiteboard calendar, and I charted out our system and installations that, the scope and sequence that we wanted to get our system staples in, on this day, this day, this day, and this day. And I'm not even talking about the whole practice plan. But like, as I looked at that calendar, I would know, right? Today, obviously it's the first day. We're going to work on, our man-to-man half-court shell and reviewing those principles. And we're going to take a look at our single, we call it our single base offensive concept that we ran against a man-to-man. We're going to take a look at, our transition fire on made shots and dead balls, court organization. And we're going to take a look at, I've always thought, right from the start, one special situation that we'd like to try to get in, 3 or 4 of those a week leading up to the first game, so that we've got something for every scenario. So I really adhered to that calendar, pretty strictly. I think it's a mistake not to, because what happens is if you don't see the whole month leading up to that first game on a calendar, I mean, for me at least, I'm not saying you, meaning me, right? Yeah. I feel like you end up in that first game and something pops up that you didn't think of, and now you're uncoached and you're standing there with your pants down in front of a crowd, and you don't have something. But let's say somebody throws a 1-3-1 out there. Whoops. We didn't work on that at all. We don't even know what we do against the 1-3-1. So it's time to take a timeout. Hopefully you've been there for a couple of years and you can throw something on the board that you did last year. But I never wanted that to happen. So that's kind of the way that I was really, really hyper vigilant, about spending a lot of time and getting that calendar just right, so that I knew that I would have, at least the framework of what we want it to look like in before we played a first game, so that nothing anybody did, save something, really exotic, we wouldn't have some preparation and something that we could turn to and say, okay, we were ready for that.
Yeah, those are good points there. The last thing that I wanted to cover about this preseason period is there's probably a dozen or more other suggestions in the guide, but the one that stands out to me would be grasping your scouting, where you're looking at schedules of your opponents, particularly your early season opponents, because early in the season it's hard to get film on the teams that you've got to play. Either they have no games that they've played already, or it's limited and you might not have connections to that team. So starting to look at who are on your early schedule is scrimmaging and where are they scrimmaging? Do you have any connections to people in those programs? Because, once you get to game 12, there's enough film out there on everybody where you can get a good look at most people on your schedule. But early in the season, it can be a struggle to kind of pull enough film together to really get an idea of what you're going up against in these early season games. So I always wanted to be prepared on that. But with that, I'd like to move us into talking about tryouts specifically, and we'll try to zoom through this a little bit better than what we did with the preseason. But this is what we're going to talk about, the idea of running a 3-day tryout, the idea of what a tryout is versus a practice, how you want to segregate your age groups, looking at what a practice plan for tryouts might be, understanding grading rubrics if you have to use them, and some of the drills that a coach might use. So are you ready to jump into tryouts here with me, Coach?
That's true. Let's do it.
Yeah, I think one of the big things that I'm a proponent of is doing tryouts over multiple days. Have you always run your tryouts over multiple days or multiple sessions?
Yeah, I feel like you have to give a kid 3 days at least. I was a big 3 to 4 day guy. I think a lot the athletic departments that I worked in, that was kind of the expectation from the start, and that's kind of what I grew up knowing as an assistant. So that's kind of what I would do. There were a couple times where after a day or two, where a kid that just really didn't have any idea what he was getting into came into the gym and really didn't see it. I would be honest with them and say, listen, this is going to be a tough thing for you to make this team. And if it was a kid that I thought could do a great job being a manager that was just really wanting to be in the gym, that would be a time to start making them think, hey, if this doesn't work out for you, there is a place for you in the program. It might not be as a player, but it will be just as important a position. And, we'll make sure you're valuable, and you'll be a part of the organization and all that other good stuff. So, 3 days, with a grain of salt in certain cases.
Yeah, I've always done 3 sessions, usually over the course of 2 days, where we'd have a single session, the first day that we were permitted, and then we would have like a 2 a day the next day. And after the first session, we wouldn't really do very many cuts, if any. Most of the people that would be cut on the first day would be people that would be ineligible based on grades or something like that. And then most of the cuts would happen after that second session. And then you would have a third session that would be more like a practice where you could do final cuts if you needed to. But one of the biggest, mistakes that I'd made was not making players sign up for tryouts. I would start putting out announcements at school that if you were going to try out for the basketball team, you had to sign up ahead of time so that we could look up your medicals, we could look up your grades, and make sure that if you were good enough to make the team, you could even participate. Because we had situations in the past where we had kids that kind of came out of nowhere, and we were thinking about keeping them, and then we did some basic research and found out they didn't have the grades to even be able to play on the team. So there's been some controversies in my coaching career where kids show up to tryouts and they don't have a physical, and that can get complicated. But I think doing a 3-session tryout with a sign up in advance is the surest way to eliminate some of these issues that I've come across. Have you shared any of the same experiences?
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. I think signups is a great idea. I did not do that my first couple of years, but then I started doing it. And it's valuable just to kind of get a feel. It also makes it harder for somebody to just kind of mosey in the gym, on a whim and decide, what, I think I'll give this a shot tonight. It's more of a commitment when you ask for somebody to sign up, to try out. I think that's the other reason that's a really good idea. I got to tell you, I feel fortunate to be able to say this. I didn't have to do a lot of cutting in my career. Like I said before, and this is a weird dynamic, right? The better we were, the less chance there was of a bunch of people coming out of the woodwork to try to take a shot at making a team.
Yeah.
Because they just kind of knew. And I don't know if you've experienced that the same way. And, I'd like to kind of hear your response to that. The one time I had to cut a bunch was my second year at Canton South, where it was a full-blown rebuild. And we graduated everybody. And then the one kid we had to return, he was supposed to be a pretty good player, decided to go early graduation. He was a football recruit at the University of Michigan. If you're an Ohio person, there's another reason to hate Michigan. For all people watching out there in Michigan, I'm not trying to do that, but his name, for any of you that maybe remember, he was a wide receiver named Gerald Robinson. So we returned literally nobody that second year. My best player was a 5'4", 115-pound freshman. And there must have been 1,000 kids in the gym, and that's hyperbole, right? I'm exaggerating. The second best player didn't look a whole lot better than the 999th, right? And that doesn't mean we had a whole lot of depth, Coach Hack. It means that it was if you ever seen the old movie, The Fish that Saved Pittsburgh, back in 1979, Dr. J was in that movie. If you haven't, shame on you. You should. Great, horrible B-rated basketball movie, but they had a tryout, and that's kind of what my gym looked like. And we had to cut that year. And honest to God, I don't know if we cut the right people or not. We were, bad is an understatement. We won one game. We won one game that year, and there should have been a federal investigation into the game we won. So, I was fortunate, other than that one year, to not have to be all that cute with the tryouts. It kind of took care of itself, and I'm grateful for that.
Yeah, at Aquinas, I had basically every year I had just enough kids to have a 3-level program, and we didn't really have to do too much cutting. We ended up keeping some players that probably shouldn't have been in the program,
right?
And they were some kind of a hybrid of a manager / player situation.
Always a good idea. Always a good idea. Yep.
At Glen Oak, I'm telling you, I cut more kids than I kept. There's just so much demand, and anytime there's a ball bouncing in the gym, you look over 5 seconds later, and there's 8 kids fighting over it, trying to just shoot the baskets. We had a lot of kids that were trying out, wanted to be a part of the basketball program. That's a good thing, and I guess maybe it's an indictment of what you said. We weren't quite good enough to scare people off. Just the hobbyists all thought that they could participate.
Yeah. Well, you have athletes. I know Glen Oak. So you guys you had 2 freshman teams, the way I remember it, and 2 8th grade teams, and you had a lot of kids that were involved in that program coming up through.
Yeah.
The bigger school that I coached at, Milton in Georgia, you weren't even associated with your middle school programs. You had what was called a feeder program, and they came up through, and it was a really select group of kids that were in those programs. And because we played a national schedule, and because everybody knew that kid's got a Duke scholarship and that kid's got a bunch of, there just weren't a lot of kids that had the nerve to come in and try it. It wasn't really anything I was doing. You just, you had to feel like you were pretty good to walk in that gym. And there were a few, and they were quickly introduced to what good really looked like when they walked in, because there were some players in that gym. But I didn't have to cut a bunch. Here's a good question for you to kind of ping it back at you. Did you ever keep a kid that you wish you hadn't kept, without naming names, of course?
Yes, several.
Yeah.
Several. Yeah. And we're going to get into this here just shortly, kind of the idea of roster construction and the thought there.
Yeah.
The last thought before we move into that I had was, what I'd noticed in running these tryouts with a lot of kids is I was always looking for a 5-to-1 ratio in terms of players to baskets in the gym. So if we had 6 baskets in the gym, I would be looking for no more than 30 kids in the gym to evaluate. When it gets more than that, then it's hard to really give each kid a look. So, the deal there is if you start getting into numbers bigger than that, then you're starting to have to make like 2 tryout sessions where you might bring in kids by their last names, A through L at this time, M through Z. And it's just a general rule. It's not a hard line rule or anything like that. But from my experience, anytime, if we were working 2 gyms at the same time with each with 6 baskets, you could do 30 kids in one gym and 30 kids in the other. But that a lot of that comes into play, whether you're going to do like varsity specific tryouts or JV and freshman combined tryouts or something like that. So it's all just, one consideration that you need to make, that anytime you've got more than 5 kids per basket, it's going to be challenging to start, to really give them a fair evaluation. So
absolutely.
Yeah, kind of moving on, you're thinking about roster construction with your tryouts here. So the imagery here is of a player funnel where we want to have the most participation in these lower grades, and we want it to kind of whittle away as kids get older. We want the standards to stay high, where kids are going to get into other activities, they're going to want to do other things, but we want participation levels to be really high at the lower grades. We want to keep players involved, and then it whittles down here until you're getting into your your juniors and seniors. So ideally, juniors and seniors, you should only have maybe 12 of those in a program at a time at the most. And even that might be,
It's too many. Yeah, it's too many. Yeah, it's too many.
But you want to think of these things in this term, where you're not just trying to create a varsity team, but you're trying to create a program that fits together, and that there's kind of a seamless next step after this season plays out. And if you're, you might be able to justify it if you're on like an extended program rebuild, and you want to give those seniors a last shot to keep an extended amount of seniors, maybe 7, 8, 9 seniors. But that's a rare occasion. For the most part, you want to have like 4 or 5 seniors at the most. You want to have 6 or 7 juniors, and you want to have a nice natural progression where you don't want to have more seniors in your program than you do sophomores. If you do, that's something that's wrong. So this thoughts on general roster construction, thoughts in how you pick your teams during a tryout?
I mean, I love the funnel. I think it's great. I mean, it kind of draws a picture of the way that I've always tried to run a program. We as a public school coach here in Ohio, we serve the entire program, right? The whole community, the whole school, from the first graders, kindergartners, all the way to 12th grade. And the way to really sustain success, or the way that we became really successful at Fairless, was the participation levels at those lower levels when I first got there were really, really high, and they hadn't been, right? That was something that we really focused on. And that's also why 7 years later, we'd become an elite program, because we had a lot of kids involved, and they progressed just like you showed in that funnel, a few less every year. Again, being a high school coach is more about winning basketball games. You're there to serve a community, and you want to get as many young boys involved, or girls, depending on which program you're running, obviously, in the community as possible, so they have opportunities to sample it, right? And then the ones that want to be serious about it continue, and the ones that sample it and hopefully enjoyed it, but like don't want to commit to it and have found other things to do, had a good experience, and they make those choices themselves. And I think that when you have it set up like that, and it is very structured, and it is very focused, and you're teaching them to love the game, but you're also teaching them specific skills at each level, you're reaching a lot of kids, even the ones that never play for you. You've got a chance to mentor them a little bit, and then by the time the ones that are going to play for you get there, they've run through the entire circuit of training and skill development and acquisition, and they're ready to be varsity players here for you. And so, that's really how it's done. That's kind of the Sports Center version of kind of, here's my program philosophy as it comes to player development and roster composition. But I think it's really well done in that diagram, Matt. Yeah.
Okay, so let's get into an actual tryout practice plan that I put together. I'll run through it real quick, and then I'll ask you for your feedback here. But we're starting with some stretching and then the Coach K drill, which is a fundamentals drill. So really what we're watching for there is how well kids can pay attention and how well they can pick up instruction and execute. This is not a drill where it needs to be perfect from the start, but you need to understand what we're trying to do in terms of the fundamentals that we're emphasizing and how you rotate in the drill. So we're really looking, more so on how kids understand instruction and process instruction. And I think that's one of the key points of having a 3-day tryout. When you do drills like this, you can run the same drill every day, and then you can see improvement over players that had never done the drill before from day 1 to day 2 to session 3. So keeping some consistency in the drills that you're doing to be able to monitor the progress of kids that haven't done the drill before, I think is a key. Lane's progression is kind of a conditioning, toughness, defensive kind of drill. So we're seeing who wants to get after it. And I can tell you in tryouts, kids really get after it. So it's fun to watch the intensity, the enthusiasm that kids play with. They're playing as hard as they can to try to make a team there. So we're going to get into some system-specific stuff. This is really our first basketball system, and we would be working on our transition here, where we're having kids understand how we want to fill lanes, how we want to advance the ball when we acquire it, whether it's out of the net, a turnover, a rebound. So we're going to work on our transition offense, and that's really the first evaluation for some of these kids in our actual basketball system. So you can really pick up on things here if there's kids that want to play basketball but haven't played a lot of organized basketball. You can really see their head spinning trying to do team specific things. And I don't think that's a reason to just directly eliminate them, but it's definitely a factor in terms of there's going to be more of a teaching progression with this player if we decide to keep them in the program. So moving on from there, we're going to do our ladder, which we talked about earlier. So that's straight conditioning, really mental toughness and conditioning. 5-pass deny is a toughness defense drill where we're again evaluating the players on how well they compete. Then we're going to put in our base offense, which was circle motion. So this is Tennessee here is what we called it. But again, now we're looking at players in a system-specific way where they've got to understand how to execute, and we can evaluate on that. And then we're going to end the day with ping pong. So we talked about ping pong a little bit earlier, but basically we're going to end with at least 30 minutes here of just watching them play after we've done all these drills. Do you have any initial thoughts just looking at this, first day tryout plan here, Coach?
No, I really like it. I like the balance that you have there between drill work and playing basketball 5-on-5. I think that we touched on that earlier. I think that's essential. I think it's a huge mistake to lean too far either way, and you're giving them a chance to play a little bit, but you're also giving them a chance to show that they understand they're going to be coached. There's a little bit of the mental in there, which I said earlier. I think that people that don't understand the game of basketball don't understand that's IQ is a skill in the sport, and coachability is a skill. And, sometimes it becomes the ultimate obstacle for kids that just have never done it before. And so you got a little bit of everything in there. And you get a chance, I feel like, with what you're doing there, to really evaluate the player, top to bottom, the best that you possibly could in a 3-day period. So I really like what you're doing.
So moving on to day 2 here, we're doing some of the same things for consistency, but we're going to switch that live play into the racer format, which is more conditioning and transition and less in the half court. And what you see here on this day 1 practice plan is we're going to put our base offense in. So we're going to teach it to you in this 15-minute block, and then we're going to use it in this ping pong format. So you're really working on the offense that you just taught the kids. Yeah. And then this would be the day 3, where it's a lot of the same things. We've shrunk down the conditioning. We're incorporating these meetings into the day where, kids are playing to end the tryout, but we might start pulling them in the office and saying, hey, appreciate what you've done here, but we're going to go in a different direction and, things of that nature. But the one thing I skipped over here on the first day, which I didn't do intentionally, but I might have wanted to just block it out, was I was into this idea of using a prospect sheet. Have you ever heard of this before, Coach?
I have not.
Okay, so what we ran into is we were having trouble with roster construction. So we wanted to get into the mindset of the players and where they saw themselves within the program.
Oh yeah, yeah,
So we would give each kid a sheet, and it was called a prospect sheet. And
yeah,
basically, they had to identify where they felt they fit in within the program. Did they think they were a star player at the varsity level? Did they think they were a role player? Did they think they were a bench player? And it was just, hey, this is an honest evaluation of yourself. You're looking at your peers that you're competing against. Where do you think you fit in? And then the other side of the sheet was, what's the minimum role you would be willing to accept with a good attitude? So the
yeah,
kids had to check, if I was a bench player, would I have a good attitude or not? If I was on the JV team, would I have a good attitude or not? So it's basically, us as a staff could come together after this first tryout. We could look at the tryout sheets and we could see, if we have 11 players that think they're starters on the varsity team, we've probably got a chemistry issue there that we need to sort out in one way or
yeah,
another. And that way to sort it out could be cutting kids, or it could be bringing them into the office and having a conversation where it's like, hey, I like your confidence here, but we're seeing you more in this role with this team with, the opportunity for growth. But we can't really commit to you being a starter or anything like that, even though, you're seeing that for yourself. So it brings out these kind of conversations, when a kid's expectations are completely mismatched from where the staff sees them, that's worth communication, or it's worth kind of parting ways
yeah,
altogether. This exercise, I think, did some good things, but it also backfired on us a time or two where, a kid's parent would come in and complain and said, well, you only thought my son was a role player at best. And I'd say,
yeah,
that's not really the exercise that we did. But so I've done this throughout my coaching career. I mean, more than once, probably maybe half of my coaching career. It's worked out pretty good. But had you ever done any kind of exercise like
yeah,
that?
yeah. I think it's great. And I really like the way that you put it here. That would be something that I would do probably exactly to the T that you just did it. It's funny. I was watching Rocky Balboa today, right? The one where he went back and he fought when he was in his 60s, and he had that one last act, right? So I'm thinking, if I've got one last act in me like Rocky, I'm a huge fan of the Rocky movies, right? 50-year anniversary here this year. That I would definitely do that the way that you did it. And it makes me laugh that it would upset any parent that you would ask that. But I did something similar to that. But I did it in the middle of the year because we were having some chemistry problems at a school where we were pretty good. And it was really telling because, I had 12 guys in the room and every single one of them thought they were the best player, you know,
Mhm.
and I got into some trouble over it because I was actually pulled in by an administrator and say, did you have these kids, evaluate, where they stood in the hierarchy of your program and rate themselves? And I was like, well, yeah. You know what I mean? We're having some problems with kids accepting their roles. And I was trying to figure out where it was. And this is one of the reasons we're having a problem. But I think that those honest conversations before the season starts, before you make your cuts, is really smart. And here's where I think it really has value, Matt. Where you have a kid and darn well they're probably not in the rotation and they think they are, right? That's where they think they are. You really have to cut that kid, and that's a harsh thing to say. But no amount of them telling you, if that they feel like they're a rotational player and they're not going to be, no amount of that kid saying, well, I just want to be on the team. They'll say that in the moment. Like the minute the games start, they're going to pretend they're going to pretend like you never had that conversation. And their parents are going to pretend like you never had that conversation.
Yep.
And you're going to end up in all kinds of headaches and trouble because you had a kid you knew darn well wasn't going to play. And he's a nice kid as long as he's not on a basketball court not getting to play. And you made a mistake there. And I've made that mistake. And I've always said better to have that 15-minute tough conversation or 3-minute or whatever it's going to be, and then maybe a 45-minute conversation with the kids' parents after they got cut, than to have this conversation once a week or twice a week for 6 months, right? It's not fun. So I really like what you did there.
Yeah, so this is an example of the actual prospect sheet that we used here. And
Yeah,
you can see what a player would check one of these boxes depending on which level they were at. and there's kind of a general description of what each tag stands for. So a varsity star means I deserve to play most of the available minutes. A varsity starter, I deserve to play between half and 3/4 of the game. A sixth man, I deserve to play around half the game. A role player, I deserve a stable role on a team and play in most games. And a bench player, I'll have a good attitude if I do not get much playing time. So the kid would check one box here on the left. They might say, I'm a varsity star, check. And the minimum role that I'd be willing to accept would be a varsity sixth man. So if we get together as a coaching staff and we're saying, well, we really see this kid as more of somebody between a bench player and a role player, that's either a conversation or that's a cut. But what it really does is when exactly what you said, when you're a month into the season and the kid is complaining that he's not playing, you can kind of say, hey, well, we had this discussion in the preseason and you told me that you would be fine if you were a bench player, and now you're a bench player and you're complaining. So where are we missing the mark here? Right. So, it's not necessarily going to tell you, exactly who you need to cut, but it's going to open the door to have a lot of conversations that are going to get everybody on the same page here.
Yeah, that's good stuff, Matt. And to your point with that, having that same conversation at the end of the year with returning players might be a powerful thing to do in exit interviews as well, which I'm sure we'll talk about eventually, and then if you're far off on the way you evaluate, your evaluation from the players, you can have a good long conversation about what they need to do in the off season to be able to get themselves in the place they think they will be in the fall. So, yeah.
Did you ever use a paper form to evaluate your players?
At a tryout?
Yep.
I did, Matt, but I did it simply to show documentation. It wasn't. I mean, you're a coach. I'm a coach. Your dad was a coach. My dad was a coach. They coached in a time where we didn't need documentation. People trusted the coach to keep the players that should make it and cut the ones that shouldn't. I started in that era, and I part of my career was in the documentation era. So I did the documentation. But I know a basketball player when I see one, you know what I mean? So it was there in case somebody challenged the decision, but it wasn't probably something that really went a whole lot into, the decision itself.
Yeah, I had, to be honest, I've never used an evaluation sheet to do my tryouts. We did have it. They had to do it at the middle school level. It was mandated for some reason.
Right.
But we would have 44 spots, which was 4 teams, 2 7th and 2 8th. And we'd have 110 kids try out. And the tryouts ended up just being coaches trying to fill out forms the whole time.
Yeah.
So I'm not really an advocate for trying to
me neither. I hate them.
Use a paper form. It feels like it's kind of a gotcha moment set up for your administration or your athletic department. But I do understand the need at some of the youth levels, especially if you're trying to decide between in-house and travel teams or your middle school teams, why something like that might be functional. So this is kind of an example of what we used for the middle school and the travel teams. But I wanted to close out our session here talking about some of the specific drills that I would use in tryouts and why I would use them. And I think one of the first points is what I talked about early in the video, which is you want to do things that don't require a ton of explanation. You don't want to, if your tryout time is pretty precious, you don't want to spend 20 minutes doing some long monologue on the court where you're explaining a whole offensive system. You want more time for the kids to be playing and be evaluated. I liked this lanes progression drill, which really is just a progression into one-on-one full court. So it starts like a zigzag kind of drill, but then it progresses into full court one-on-one, and it even progresses from there into 2-on-1 situations where you've got 2 defenders. They're trying to trap a player who's trying to break the edge. So I really like this one from a standpoint of the conditioning. It really shows you ball handling. It shows you how your players defend in space. It gets competitive and it's tough. So it really challenges, the mental toughness here. But it just starts out with dry form slides and progresses into full court one-on-one and different variations. but that's always been a staple of mine. Moving into 5-pass deny. This is probably my favorite drill that I run. Is this one that I might have even stole from you, Coach?
Let's see it.
This is I believe this is a Randy Montgomery special here that we're going to see with 5-pass deny. Let me get it up on the screen real quick here. All right. Okay, so 5-pass deny, we've got 2 teams of 5. You've got a 1 dribble limit per time you catch the ball, and you have to either complete 5 passes or score a basket to get a point on offense. So the defense is playing all-out deny. They're giving as much ball pressure as they can, but what we're really evaluating here is our players' ball handling, our players' toughness. And then the interesting thing with this is you let the players pick their teams. So you get to see from like a peer-to-peer evaluation standpoint who the players want to roll with, who the players trust to handle the ball, who the players think are tough. So you get a lot of goodness here. I love the competition. I love the ball handling, and I like to see how the other players evaluate their peers.
Yeah, I like it. Yeah, we did that one. I do it a little bit differently, but it's very similar. Yeah.
Well, it was showing up on the screen, or it wasn't, Coach? Was it?
I didn't see it on the screen, but like it,
Okay.
yeah, there it is. Now I see it. I see it. Yeah.
Okay,
You know
so
what go ahead. Yeah.
This is just a little taste of a 5-pass deny. I probably shouldn't have pulled it up if I wasn't ready to get it going real quick. But we got 2 teams, 1 offense, 1 defense. If the defense causes a turnover, they go to offense, and the offense goes to defense. If the offense completes 5 passes or scores a bucket, they get a point. So you're playing to 3 points here. And again, it's ball security, it is competitiveness, and it's that peer-to-peer evaluation piece.
Yeah, I like it. That's good stuff. Yep. We did a variation of that. We would go 4-on-4 inside the 3-point arc, no dribble. And you had to do the same thing, 5 catches or a layup. And that was a really physical screening drill. Obviously, you had to do some reading of screens and things like that. We would extend a 5-second count to 7, and it was a lot of working on jab, step, pivot, arch, sweep, clearing space, and guys moving without the ball and screening and getting open and things like that. It became extremely physical, and we would play it in a make it or take it setting. If there was a layup, the ball went in the basket. They'd have to, the team that scored would keep the ball and check it up through a coach who was standing at the point, and the coach would literally catch the ball and flip it right back to the player that filled the point, and the new team would have to run on and shout who they were guarding, and it was a continuous drill. It would be, you could play 5-on-5 on 5-on-5, or 4-on-4 on 4-on-4, as many as you wanted. So it's a very similar concept.
Okay, so we're rounding out here, trying to finish up our tryouts. I just wanted to take a look at a couple more drills here, and then we will get out of here. So we've got I'm going to get back to the document here, and we've got this is ping pong that I was talking about earlier, where you've got three teams. So this team right here is going to compete against each other. Whoever wins the possession is going to take it back this way at the black team here. We talked about racer. So racer is going to look like this, where you have the teams waiting underneath the basket. These teams are going to play whenever a basket is scored. If a basket's scored on this end, this group's going to grab the ball and they're going to push it at this team that scored, and those teams are going to play until a basket's scored. If a basket's scored here, then this team's going to take it. So one of the fun parts of the racer is you can actually put your transition element into it, where you would have like a 4 or 5 maybe under the basket, and it would simulate them getting a rebound, and you would outlet to your 1, and you're filling the lanes like you would in our fire transition system. So not only is it transition basketball and conditioning, but you can actually work on your transition offense system through a drill like this.
Yeah, I like it.
All right, Coach. I think we're going to wrap it there. I think we've shared all that we can about our preseason period and tryouts. We went a little bit longer than what I was hoping, which is what we always do. That is standard. We went 20 minutes over, but I do really appreciate your thoughts on how to navigate this preseason and tryout period. And this is going to be included in our advanced coaching course that we're putting together, where we're consolidating a lot of these products into kind of a cohesive series of lessons that can take a coach from being relatively new or basic in coaching to an advanced level. So, Coach, any final thoughts here before we sign off?
No, I mean, really, Matt, just glad you had me again. And like I've always said, I'm always more than I enjoy sharing the things that have worked for me, and I'm very candid about the things that didn't. And like every other time we get together, I always learn something new. So like I said, if I had that last Rocky Balboa act in me at some point, I feel like I become a little bit better coach every time we talk. And I appreciate the opportunity every time.
All right, Coach. Hey, let's connect up again soon and do another one. How's that sound?
Absolutely, as soon as possible.
All right. Take care, Coach.
See ya.